Yeah, but Trump would say, getting back to my question, John, that he has stopped Iran's nuclear program. Is that true?
Well, that's the argument that they're going to make now. Remember, I said at the top of the show, what's happening here is that the nuclear issue is more or less disappeared. All we're
Exactly.
talking, it's really quite remarkable.
It is. Yeah.
Well, the nuclear issue has not disappeared at all. And after everything that's happened, and remember our emphasis on the lack of trust that exists in the present situation, the Iranians have a greater incentive than ever to acquire nuclear weapons. And the idea that they don't have the capability now to do that is not a serious argument. They can easily, in my opinion, reconstitute their nuclear program. They still have all that enriched uranium, enriched up to 60%, and it's easy to go from 60% to 90%. They could develop a bomb with relative ease. This
Okay.
is why we wanted to get rid of their nuclear enrichment program, which we have not done.
So the unintended consequence of this debacle is that Tehran really does have powerful incentives to develop nuclear weapons so that this sort of thing doesn't happen again. Vali, your thoughts on that? And also just generally, how long would it take for Iran to rebuild?
Well, that's now an intelligence guesstimate because we really don't know how much was destroyed, how easily can basically they rebuild their cascades and reconstitute the program. But I think we're not talking about a very long time. We were talking maybe a clock of 2 to maximum 5 years for them to not just be able to enrich and have fissile materials, but actually even to weaponize it and have sufficient number of warheads that would give them deterrence. But now we're in a position that they may not do that, provided the United States is willing to pay a very high price. In other words, if out of this current MOU, you're going to get the United States to agree to a longer ceasefire with Iran, move its troops out, potentially pay reparations, etc. Now, the only things that will make the Iranians listen is the U.S. giving them things, not demanding things. I mean, I think the period that you can basically pressure Iran into submission, even on technicalities of the nuclear issue, I think is gone. I think now the U.S. essentially will be asking them, what do you want to make this a non-issue, even if they were to accept it. And so we're seeing in these demands that Iran is now very comfortable demanding, and the United States is not comfortable demanding. So I think psychologically, Washington hasn't got there, not just the White House, the political class in Washington, a lot of the journalists. I mean, this word that they continuously overuse, Iran is overplaying its hand. It's just more like what it means to me is that we cannot believe how much this picture has changed. There must be something unreal about this. But in reality, Iran is not overplaying its hands. It's just playing its hand.
Yeah, but Vali, I've put this question to John in past programs with other guests. Let me put this to you. Whether it's the IRGC, the so-called hardliners, or the so-called moderates who support the president and the parliamentary speaker and their chief negotiator, shouldn't they be concerned about the economic toll that Iran is suffering from the war? I mean, you've got this US blockade of the Iranian ports that's delaying Iran's economic recovery. So I'd put the question to you, given that, isn't Iran overplaying its hands?
Well, first of all, let me say, I don't believe in this moderates versus hardliners. I think there is more division in Washington than there is in Tehran.
Right. Okay.
The Rubio, Vance and the dysfunctionality of decision-making in Washington is a lot more than Tehran. Every government ultimately has a debate over policy. But I think there is a consensus in Iran that they will not give up the strait. There is a consensus that they have managed the war very, very well. There is a consensus that they have defeated the superpower, or at least put it on its heels. What is there for them to debate about? Even this argument that now has become very popular in Washington, I think a lot of it is really disinformation that Mujtaba Khamenei is dead or he's not really in charge. What difference does it make? Whoever is in charge is running a tight ship. I mean, we're asking the wrong question here. So what if he's dead or alive? It doesn't make a difference. So no, I don't think they see themselves overplaying their hand. They think they have a narrow window to get the maximum amount of strategic advantage from having turned the table on the US. It would be unconscionable if they didn't press their advantage. The future generations, they think, will ask them, you had the US on its back heel. This was the time for you to ask for more. And they would say that the US has put blockade in Iran now twice, and the US is the first to blink. They can suffer more than everybody else can. After 47 years of suffering, they can suffer more. And they ultimately think that the only way to a better place is through the path they're going. Now, I'm not going to sort of second guess whether they're overplaying their hand or not, but I think a country that in the past 6 months has managed to survive two nuclear-powered militaries going after it, the world's premier superpower, Middle East's most armed and technologically advanced military, and yet we're having this discussion. I think in humility, we have to think that maybe they've got it right. And actually, the society, and I don't mean put it only on Trump, everybody else in Washington who's thought that the Iran policy and the way we've gone about it has been correct all along, that Israel is correct, that that they obviously have got it wrong. So far, they've got it wrong, and ultimately, and on the economic issue, Iran is suffering. But John said at the very beginning, they're asking for big economic gives. You have to pay for water reparations. You have to unfreeze up to $30 billion. Iran has reportedly up to $100 billion of frozen assets around the world. We want to trade and we want to sell oil to whoever we want, and you need to get out of the way. And once you lift the sanctions, we will be able to actually collect tolls more easily because we can actually receive the money. So short-term pain, long-term gain. That's the way they're seeing it.
Yeah, John, though, Pat Buchanan, the original America First Republican presidential candidate, both in 1992 and 1996, he once quipped that Congress was Israeli-occupied territory. Don't you need congressional support for sanctions relief? This is going to be very difficult for Trump to get Republicans especially, but also even some Democrats to support sanctions relief.
Well, I think there's no question that Congress will do everything it can to get in the way of sanctions relief. But there are a lot of things that Trump can do to deal with that issue. Congress has limited control on this issue. Trump has a lot of cards to play. And if the Congress refuses to go along with Trump and doesn't, fully lift the sanctions, the Iranians can compensate for that with tolls. But Tom, let me just make one point on this whole issue of Iran overplaying its hand. I agree with Bali completely. The idea that you're possibly overplaying your hand is in effect saying that the Iranians ought to be more moderate in their demands. And if they're more moderate in their demands, the Americans will be more reasonable. We can work out a modus vivendi here. Any Iranian who believes that is out of his mind. The idea that you can accommodate the United States and the United States will accommodate Iran is an argument that is belied by the historical record here. And Iranians fully understand that there's only one way to deal with the United States, and that's to play hardball, period. End the story. And if you start making concessions to the Americans, they'll take advantage of you. Just look at what happened with the 17 June Memorandum of Understanding. Do you need any more evidence that you can't trust the United States? I don't think so.
Yeah, the Iranian political system, Vali, and you've studied Iran in great detail. You're one of America's and the world's leading experts on Iran. Isn't it premised on a sort of hatred of the United States? And this is a point that a lot of the neoconservatives make. So, any reconciliation with Washington would threaten the foundations of its anti-Western ideology.
Well, yes, the Iranian Revolution started out being anti-American and is to some degree embedded in their thinking. But now it also has national security reasoning behind it. This is not cultural hatred after 40, 50 years. The United States actually, since the June 12-day war and the 40-day war up to this period, has shown itself to be a single greatest threat to Iran. I mean, the minds of the Islamic Republic, there is no distinction between regime and country. It's true that many Iranians may say the United States is only a threat to the Islamic Republic, but the people who are making decisions in Iran, basically, they see this as an attack on Iran. The United States wants to destroy its infrastructure. The United States and Israel were contemplating breaking it up, creating ethnic tensions. The United States wants to cage Iran, kick it out of the Middle East, weaken it, break it, a Libya scenario, a Syria scenario. I mean, those are the kinds of debates you have in Iran. That's the U.S. objective. So now that we've arrived at this point, I think the path to somewhere better, and we've been there. I mean, we went to war with Vietnam or with China over Korea, and at the end of the day, there was a point at which there was a turning point. I think it has to first start with Iran not feeling the United States is an imminent national security threat. I mean, you're not going to get to somewhere better unless that is taken away. And you have to also look at it this way. Maybe Iran is out of sight, out of mind for Americans for long periods. But the Iranians, this regime in particular, all of these people in IRGC, Mojtaba Khamenei was sitting at the side of his father for decades. For decades, they have been under imminent threat of the United States. And I just put it to you, this sort of as a something for us to think. Any country in which over a 1-year period you assassinate close to 150 of its leaders, I mean, and that its leaders have to be in hiding because they may be imminently assassinated and killed. I mean, for them, the U.S. threat is real. It's a whole debate as to whether they're responsible in bringing it onto themselves. Could they have been nicer 10 years ago, 20 years ago, etc.? But at this juncture where we're in, Iran basically is trying to manage the U.S. threat, which came to war. And John said it, they want to change the balance of power in the Middle East. But balance of power also means the balance of threat. That they don't want to be hiding in bunkers. They don't want their leaders to be killed. They don't want them to be attacked. And so, we're now whether Iran can become like Vietnam, there's somewhere down the road that there could be a reconciliation even after a big war. We'll see. But I think it doesn't benefit the United States to make this about ideology, or as George Bush used to say, they just hate us. I think that's not very productive.
There are strategic concerns at play here, indeed. John, let's turn to the other big news this week, the Security Pact, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey. This was signed in Mecca. And what's basically 3 Sunni countries in the region coming together, countering Iran. Could this agreement have been signed with America's blessing? And what does this tell you?
Well, I think what this agreement tells you is that many countries in the Middle East have lost faith in the American security umbrella, and they don't think the United States can protect them. And they're searching around, they're desperately searching around for new arrangements to provide security. And I think the Saudis and the Pakistanis and the Turks all came together for the purposes of trying to create a NATO-like agreement that will allow them to deal with threats in the region. And this is especially important, again, because the Americans can no longer provide that kind of security. The question you have to ask yourself is whether this is a meaningful agreement, whether it looks anything like NATO. And the fact is, it does not. What made NATO work was that you had an obvious threat. It was geographically concentrated, mainly in Central Europe. Everybody in the West was scared stiff of the Soviet threat. And that provided the glue that allowed these countries to come together in the heart of Europe to deal with the Soviet Union. And we created what is probably the most successful military alliance in history. you have nothing like that in the Middle East. I don't even know what the single threat is that Pakistan, Saudi
Well,
Arabia.
isn't it Shia Iran?
I, if I would say, I would say yes, the media thinks it's all about Iran, but I would say this is as much about a counterpunch against Abraham Accords as it's about
Right.
Iran. So, UAE is doubling down on its alliance with Israel, is breaking with Saudi Arabia, is menacing Saudi Arabia in Yemen, in Sudan, in Somalia. And ultimately, let's also remember at that moment of enthusiasm Israelis had that Iran is going to fall, Bibi Netanyahu and the other prime ministerial hopeful Naftali Bennett very openly said, we're done with the Shia axis. We're not going to go after the Sunni axis. And the Sunni axis, they didn't name Saudi Arabia, but Pakistan and Turkey were definitely in it. Naftali Bennett openly said that Turkey, from not just the Iranians, but the other sort of alliance that might be shaping in this region, which is around the Abraham Accords. And let's not forget that also this Saudi maneuver is coming almost a week after Trump first put the idea of a nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia on the table, and then said, well, you need to join the Abraham Accords for that to happen. And the Saudis are basically saying that, no, I mean, we are worried about two powers or two axes in this region, Iran and Israel. Yeah. And to John's point, the U.S. has proven itself incapable of defending the Gulf countries against Iran. It will be unwilling to defend them against Israel.
Yeah, well, I mean,
very different problem that the Gulf countries have. If Israel begins to have bases in UAE and begins to show up in UAE and then in Somaliland and then through UAE in Yemen, then the Saudis are not just worried about, they will be worried about what do they do being surrounded by Israel in that sense.
And we should remember that the Sunni Gulf allies of the United States made it very clear to President Trump before February 28, be careful what you wish for, don't strike at Iran. John, the neocons are upset that Saudi Arabia has not joined the Abraham Accords. Remember, this was the late Lindsey Graham's, one of his big initiatives in the Middle East was to get the Saudis into the Abraham Accords and get them closer to Israel. To the extent that Valley is right, does this mean that the Saudis and these other Gulf states are worried not just about Iran, but also Israel's clout, that its demonstration of its powerful military and intelligence capabilities after October 7 in 2023? John?
I think there's no question that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are deeply worried about Israel. I don't think the Pakistanis are. But, Vali was talking about the UAE and the fact that UAE has become very close to Israel.
That's right.
What happens if Israel puts military assets in the UAE and those two countries become even closer together and the Israelis put their security umbrella over the UAE? Since the UAE is a bitter adversary of both Iran and Saudi Arabia, wouldn't that bring Iran and Saudi Arabia together to counter Israeli influence in the UAE? So you begin to see just how messy the future is going to be when you start to think about the different constellation of forces that could form.
Valley, what do you make of all that?
No, I agree. I think, what we're witnessing in all this talk of U.S. defeat is that for the past, let's say, 47 years since the Iranian Revolution, the United States has provided the scaffolding, the backbone of a security structure for the Arab world, right? That is crumbled, not only because of the fact that we wanted to leave since the Obama period, but also now because the region no longer is comfortable with that security arrangement. And, in this interregnum between an old world and whatever replaces it, ultimately, you're going to have all kinds of experimentations and all kinds of other ideas to fill the void. The Saudis are basically playing with ideas here. I mean, they're not sure whether the Pakistanis would shoot at anybody, Iranians, Israelis, etc. But right now, these are trial balloons that will bring the Turkey and Pakistan, maybe down the road, Egypt, Qatar into an alliance. Maybe the Iranian, these countries will help balance Iran. But all of it essentially tells you how much the United States stature has diminished. That's what's the real issue is here, is how much it's diminished. And so there are consequences to this talk of defeat that we're saying. I mean, anytime, I think we're not quite absorbing the psychological impact on the Gulf of the U.S. just being unable to protect them against Iran, and even unable to protect these bases. When you see that out of the 17 bases, 16 of them have been severely damaged, that Iran has been systematically carrying out a policy that's called debasing, is making the bases unusable in varieties of ways, that these countries, it's almost like Germany having no military under an American defense umbrella, and then all of a sudden that not being there, which is also the case in Europe. Then you have all kinds of reactions coming out, and that's what we're witnessing.
And this question about the diminished American credibility, presence, standing, legitimacy in the Persian Gulf brings us to the breaking news this morning in Washington, which is Israel's decision to pull out of this Gaza peace plan. John, this was all about a phased disarmament of Hamas in Gaza. What's going on there?
Well, I never took this whole discussion seriously at all. The Board of Peace.
Well, hang on. Trump did hail it as a historic deal, and he did go to great lengths, in his plan at least, to note that the Palestinians have been through a lot. Didn't he put his prestige and credibility on the line here?
He might have, but he surely must have known that the Israelis were not going to play ball with him. Look, the Israelis are interested in creating a greater Israel. And in the process, they want to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza, and they want to ethnically cleanse the West Bank. Israel is a genocidal apartheid state, period. And the idea that they were going to agree, after everything that's happened since October 7, 2023, to evacuate Gaza and allow the Palestinians to once again control Gaza is just not in the cards. That was not going to happen. Benjamin Netanyahu was not going to allow that to happen, nor are any of his likely successors. So this cockamamie idea that the Board of Peace was pushing through was just never going to work. And surprise of surprises, Netanyahu said that.
But John, Israel did carry out unilateral disengagement from the Gaza Strip in 2005. We've talked about that in the past. And Israel, and you like to use this language, is up to its eyeballs in alligators, not just with the Iranians, but also with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, even Syria. So doesn't Israel have a deep-seated interest in trying to shut down this war in Gaza?
One would think so, but there's no evidence that they think that's the case. What they're interested in doing is doubling down. If you look at public opinion in Israel, there's great support for Netanyahu's policies towards the Palestinians. One would think that given the Israelis have been executing a genocide since 2023, that there would be a substantial slice of the population in Israel that was outraged by this genocide. But there's zero evidence of that. And what people want to see happen is they want to see Israel get rid of all the Palestinians in Gaza and hopefully get rid of the Palestinians in the West Bank and create a greater Israel that's populated almost exclusively by Israeli Jews.
But just finally, Vali, on this issue, isn't it in Trump's interest to de-escalate this Gaza conflict and also the conflict in southern Lebanon with Israel? Because this is really big factors in ending the broader war against Iran. Vali.
Well, again, this I think is much like the pact Saudis, Pakistanis, and Turks are having, is a consequence of what's happened with the Iran war. So, I think at one level also, Bibi overreached in Lebanon and Iran. These are now very clear wars that he couldn't win, and Israel was strategically defeated. He's going to the war that he thinks he can win before the October elections, which is keep beating on the Palestinians and claiming that he's making major advances and shift the attention from Iran and Lebanon to Gaza. So to me, all the inclinations that are there for them to want this territory, push the Palestinians out aside, is also evidence that they have fallen short against Iran. And for Trump, I think is indication how much stature again has he lost. He cannot control Bibi anymore. I mean, in this situation when the Iranians are putting this kind of a dictate on the table, and there's not much he can do about it, you see others who might have respected him or listened to him or been afraid of him also basically going rogue. So there is a domino effect with being shown to be so weak with Iran. It's not so much always with China and Russia, it's even with friends in the region and his closest ally in the war. So he basically, Bibi's telling him the deal's off. I don't care about the Board of Peace. I don't care about what happens to you, what you think. I'm going to just do what I think should have been done and still wanted to do in Gaza. And I think we should read it as a sign of Trump losing control.